Good morning. Welcome.
Good morning.
The topic is 20 years and counting, secrets to enduring user groups. And who am I? Michael Dexter. You can find me on Twitter, Michael Dexter, and my email's there. And I've been involved in quite a few communities, and it kind of just dawned on me at one point that I can't quite explain why I'm involved in lots of communities, but it might be worth exploring. So from about 85 onward, I've been involved with the Oregon Latvian Association and its society. And 88 to present, in high school, I started getting involved in student government and then neighborhood government, pretty much to this day. And in 2002, I was a founding member of the Latvian Open Source Association. And starting in about 2003, I got very involved in the BSD community. And you're welcome to come down to the BSD booth down with the foundation and Freenaz and other neat stuff that's down in the expo hall. And starting in 2010, I returned to Portland. And I've been organizing the Portland Unix Group. We have 3 meetings per month. We have a general meeting and advanced topics and a hands-on clinic, which is more of your traditional LUG meeting. So I've organized the last 100 or so speakers, including Linus Torvalds, Kelsey, Hightower, Kuhn, some big names, Josh Burkus just recently. And I'm always looking for speakers, so you're welcome to ping me about, hey, you've got something to talk about. Hey, there's an audience ready. So continuing with what, I am not talking about BSD virtualization or hypervisors or file systems or OpenZFS or Freenaz, which are the normal topics I talk about. But you can catch me in the hallway if you want to talk about those. And there's an increasing chance I'll be giving a talk in place of Larry Caffiero tomorrow about switching from Linux to BSD. So, on to the what. Why do some user groups and communities endure for decades while others do not? And why that is the question. And visual aid. Who is familiar with the book The Art of Community by John O'Bacon? It came out several years ago, and it is quite good. It was pretty much historic. There's a second edition. It's available for a free download at a domain name that is more or less The Art of Community. You can search for that and you'll find it. But it is a rather good book. You can pass that around. And so he has a wonderful introduction and goes through his experience in the UK and ends up with the reason why Ben was so involved in LUG Radio and why Neil ran the Unix Group meetings and why thousands of other community members around the world get together comes down to one simple word: belonging. And I found that quite powerful. It's like, wow, that does explain a lot and explains a lot of my experience of what triggered my participation, especially in Europe, which I can go into separately. But do community leaders belong? I mean, how do you start a community? How do you lead a community? I think there's more to it. So let's talk motivations and briefly demotivations. So I'll get first the dark ones out of the way. Apathy, betrayal, criticism, death, effort, failure, you name it. There are countless forces that discourage community leaders. And some are real subtle, some are really direct, be it abuse of people in meetings, and you name it. So keep those in check, but somehow certain people just keep at it despite challenges, despite the amount of time it might take, hence effort, despite colleagues passing away. And in my virtualization circles, we lost someone late last year. And it left a most painful hole in everyone involved. When a bunch of volunteers lose a key volunteer, it's devastating. So be prepared for that. But let's be more positive. So I bumped into, it's called foul language, foul like a bird. And there's a great thing on parenthood I'll let you read here about. I'll do some highlights here. Geez, the way you described it, having kids sounds horrible. Yeah, welcome to parenting. Well, you've convinced me I'm never having children. Yeah, that's a shame. They're pretty awesome. You just finished saying how terrible it was. Well, sure, mostly drudgery and frustration, but it's still like, the best thing ever. That makes no goddamn sense. Yeah, well, welcome to parenting. So community leadership's a bit like that. It's just, well, yes, we do it, and we can't always explain it. So I put some thought into what are those motivators for different people, and for some people, it's ego, it's passion, it's job opportunities, networking at your local LUG or otherwise, and personal promotion and compassion. Sometimes you're there for a local community, be it community in need or otherwise. Pressure comes in various forms. Some of it's if you're a member of that community and they say, well, we really need this to happen. We need to continue with the event. Well, you could do it, should do it, and you don't want to be that person who's the one who let it die off because of activity. So there's also pay. Some communities have paid people who make things happen. And we'll get into a little bit about the blessing and curse of money in communities. But the fundamental question, which of those are sustainable? Money is not always sustainable. When it goes, and things can switch off like a light switch. So maybe there's more to it. And living in Europe, I got a good sense of, from just my surroundings, the difference between a belief in God and a belief in church. Just by circumstance, my family went to a rather humble church, and I later dropped into a colleague, and I'm not super religious, but I then saw this gorgeous church with the big polished donation thing they pass around, and I was like taken back, where for some people, a church is what you make it. It could be a few sticks in a forest, and you get together there and you do what you do. And I sense a pretty tangible difference there. And let's get into, say, student government and neighborhood involvement. Who's part of their neighborhood association? Anyone? Attended meetings? Got one? Okay. It can be delightful. It can be awful. But a true story from college. I was living 4 years on campus in a dormitory, and the debate group wanted to have an office in our basement. And that's a reasonable request, and we had been putting more and more lounges in there because, well, we need that space. And it was really hard to explain that we live there. We are there from evening till morning, and then drop in during the day, and we don't leave. And most of the folks were off-campus folks, and it's really hard to explain that, no, this is our home. We live right here. This is important to us. This is home. And it's just a different take on the exact same space. So this whole Latvian thing, it's like, well, any Latvians in the room? Yeah. Half Latvian, citizen, you name it, wife's Latvian, mom's Latvian. And so what on one level? What do you care? But what if this is a people whose culture has been systematically erased by the Bolsheviks? My grandfather was jailed by the Bolsheviks. He was an architect, and that's not fashionable when they're trying to simplify a community. And my grandparents escaped in a little boat chased by Russian gunboats, and they made it to Sweden, where they were treated like aliens, and eventually had a choice of Kuala Lumpur, South Africa, or America. And they took the Queen Mary from Liverpool to Ellis Island, and the rest is history, and end up in Hollywood. But maybe I kind of owe this to my grandfather. And I was thinking, with this awesome local conference, I drove from Portland, my family could come. I've got room in the hotel, and let's do it. But tomorrow morning, my wife will be organizing the Latvian Center Cultural Sunday School. It's language, it's crafts and arts and all that, and our two kids do that, among other kids. And why do we do that? Perhaps for the kids. Maybe it's a longer-term investment, but that's just what we do. So bringing it home here, let's talk open source software and software freedom. It's a open source Linux event, BSD event, you name it. And so a little more about just my personal motivations. I've come up with Dexter's Law, which is only proprietary software vendors want proprietary software. Everyone else will, given a choice and all things equal, support, etc., they will choose software freedom. And I do personally believe that someday we will look back and laugh at proprietary software. Just there are various people at this event who have given their lives to help making that happen. And day to day, that doesn't matter to most people. But some folks just passionately want to see that through. And it's instinctive. And along with a belief in church versus God is a difference between price and priceless. And those MasterCard ads are actually pretty good about this, where like, okay, the whole camping trip that either succeeded or failed, but the end result is priceless. And the contributions I've seen over the years from just volunteers are amazing. It's just sort of superhuman things at times, be it the technical stuff, be it putting on events, be it all the volunteers from the school who, thank you, who's helped set this up, who just jump in, and you could be home, you could be studying, you could be doing what you do, but you're here helping all these fine people get together. So I think a sense of purpose is important, and ultimately a sense of social justice for many people. And if we're talking sustainability of that whole list of things of what's sustainable, what's not, well, I think a low-level, gut-level sense of purpose and even broader commitment to your community or the world is a key point to what's sustainable. So that's what's emerging for me as some of the why, at least why for me personally. And let's talk about some of the how. So, generational continuity. I'll give you a cartoon here, which is from Diary of a Wimpy Kid, and it's just a very cute story how Grandpa's board game is not very entertaining to young Mr. Heffley, where putting economic policy before fiscal responsibility is like putting the cart before the horse, is the little game card, and Grandpa's laughing his head off, whereas the kid is like, what the hell are you talking about? So, I think in these communities it's been hard, especially with, say, Latvians, where upon my arrival, the thinking was Latvia died in 1945 and moved to Oregon. It's like, okay, but my wife may have been born in the Soviet Union, but they actually got free. Did you get the memo? And there's a whole culture there, and they don't speak Russian, and actually there's this whole world there. But strangely, we have like the neighbors of the Latvians, the Swedes, and the Norwegians, and the Sons of Norway. Similar organization for the community. You're not one of us. It's like, well, passport says so, and well, you're not one of our clique from that generation that set up this community. It's like, well, okay, so either we work on that or we move on, because communities face that in user groups and other communities. So what will Linux, the kernel, look like after Linus? If he just retires or otherwise, what will it look like? What will your one of countless little niches of free software and open source look like after your perhaps benevolent dictator goes away? Some communities have seen multiple generations of leadership changes. Some have not seen a single one, and it varies. So a few words on sustainable organizational structures. So the Latvian Open Source Association, LAKA, Latvijas Atvērtā Asociācija, they decided to be a registered nonprofit, but not a public benefit one, because that's most challenging over there. It's only $10 per year membership. And soon into its meetings, every conversation became about who's going to file the paperwork and prepare the tiny trivial bookkeeping. And it was quite sad to watch not much, Linux talk or open source talk happen. Very frustrating. By contrast, the Oregon Latvian Society is a 501c3 registered nonprofit, has been for decades, has 3 different divisions of society, the church and the other one, and little fiefdoms at times, some communication, but we can talk later on as we sort of open this up to roundtable, but the whole nonprofit thing versus the whole show up and make it happen thing. So there are advantages to different structures, but also some challenges to each. Office of Network Involvement, Southwest Neighborhoods, the Portland neighborhood groups I've been sort of involved in. Sweeney's a fiscal sponsorship of ONI, which is a government office or possibly separate nonprofit. And the neighborhood itself is actually, each neighborhood is a fiscal sponsorship of the regional neighborhood association, et cetera, et cetera. And things were going great. I was rebuilding a local neighborhood. And just recently, they proposed a new set of template bylaws for all the neighborhoods. And it was designed to protect from board member liability. And the whole thing was structured to do that. And from a program perspective of just making things happen in the neighborhood, I thought, what the heck? This doesn't make sense. It makes sense to the lawyers, but doesn't make a whole lot of sense on the ground. And finally, plug the Portland Linux Unix Group. It's a domain name. That's it. That's as legally registered as plug is. And 20 years later, it's still a domain name. There is donated internet hosting for 2 mailing lists and a website. There's a donated space at Portland State University and one at Free Geek that's used for 2 meetings. And that's the extent of the bureaucracy of plug. And that one is proving really low stress. So, as I touched on earlier, the power of $1 in and out. First off, if any group organizers here, show of hands, anyone just getting some people together. So you'll find, especially at a more professional event or large event like this, if you have free registration, you'll get lots of registration and potentially 50% showing up, or maybe 75% if you're local, if you're lucky. But if you charge $1, people have a financial commitment to your event. You get like 90% people showing up that registered. So money's a funny thing in communities. And those structures I mentioned earlier each have a different relationship with money. If you wanted to declare yourself a lifetime plug member, you are a lifetime plug member. Your dues are paid, and you can have your money back if you're dissatisfied. Now, $1 out. The moment you pay a volunteer, among other volunteers, things can get really ugly really quickly. It takes a lot of agreement up front that there is value in that. And you may recall, for example, the discussion of a Debian paid release engineer, as I recall. And be very cautious introducing money to a community because I think there's fundamental psychology there. Maybe you can enlighten me into what happens, but people get weird. So you've probably heard of the meritocracy thing. Anyone? Show of hands. It's like sort of this exciting, great sounding concept. Wow. Let's see. It would be there's just one random definition I found. A government or the holding of power by people selected on the basis of their ability. Well, okay. Is merit a motivation? Or is it just, oh, they're the best qualified? And has anyone heard of the Peter Principle? I think it's Peter Drucker. Do you want to describe it? How would you define the Peter Principle?
Any organization, the people in the structure will rise to their highest level of incompetence.
Okay, so I'll repeat that for the recording. In an organization, people rise to their highest level of incompetence. And one of my better examples might be a supermarket checkout person, checker, who loves their work. And they just love interacting with people. They love the excitement of it. They just love it. And wow, they're the fastest line, and wow, we just value them. So obviously we want to make them in charge of all the checkers. Maybe. Obviously we want them to be the district training person for all the other checkers. No, maybe they love their work, and there's nothing more to it. And the worst thing you could do for your organization or that person is to promote them to the very top. So I think the same goes for leadership. If you think, wow, this person in theory fits the role, that doesn't mean they're motivated. That doesn't mean they're going to stick around. That doesn't mean they'll be happy. So what I think you mean by this whole meritocracy thing is an equal opportunity organization. And in open source free software circles, it's, well, is your code good? Is your attitude acceptable? Great, welcome. It's not a question of, I think the classic meritocracy definition comes out of England and a royalty and birthrights and all that stuff, which is not so familiar here in the colonies. So I I've heard several attacks on the term meritocracy, and yeah, I caution you in using it, but do think about, is your organization an equal opportunity one? And related to that, do not confuse control with leadership. Control's pretty easy. Control can mean you're on the founding documents and you control the bank account and you can tell people what they can and can't do with money. Well, and various other forms. That's not always leadership. That doesn't inspire them to come up with ideas to do things with money. And I've seen in various organizations, various confusion of that. And touching on meritocracy and some of the rougher edges of the broader community, let's talk about trolls with goals. So, if you want to know who are the jerks in your community, suggest the adoption of a code of conduct. It's like jerk kryptonite. I have censored that for the recording. So this is something I found on Twitter, and I think it beautifully covers the current discussion on codes of conduct, which very much have their place, but are not a panacea. And I'll add to that Sayre's law, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. In any dispute, the intensity of the feeling is inversely proportional to the value of the issue at stake. And somewhat similar in various circles is bike shedding. Anyone heard bike shedding? Have a working definition? Definition?
If you have a really complicated question like what should the theme of LinuxFest be, it'll be really hard to get discussion. If you have something really simple like what color should we paint the bike shed, everyone will have an opinion and you'll never get consensus.
Bingo. So I'll paraphrase. If you have a good example of, if you have, say, LinuxFest Northwest and you need to determine a general theme, coming up with consensus is very difficult and we sort of kind of trust the herd. But if you need to decide on what color to paint its bike shed, well, everyone will have a very strong opinion and you might have a bloodbath on discussing that. It comes out of the idea of an atomic power plant. The plant itself is so complex and so standard-driven and architect and engineering-driven that no one person can take issue with pretty much anything about it. They can kind of contribute, make it happen. But when it comes to the bike shed and back, well, everyone has a very, very strong opinion. So that allows things to monopolize discussion, unfortunately. And again, perhaps I'll go back to the same one. That the importance of it and how small that importance is may indirectly drive the passion behind it. If it's trivial, people get really riled up because they can fully grasp the extent of it. They can, visualize it and take charge. And here's another graph I found. It's sort of a Venn diagram of the jerks in the community, the people who tolerate jerks, and the nice people. And you'll find that while some people will tolerate some jerks, some will not. And it's actually potentially a very large majority who will not tolerate the jerks. And you are excluding people right and left by doing that, by tolerating jerks. So I'll read his quotation also from Twitter. When you allow or enable hostile people in your community, you exclude people who won't tolerate them. I believe they have a typo there. But that happens. And I've faced that in a number of communities. I'm sure you have too. And so here's going from all the theory of codes of conduct and the like, because there is a place for them, and often they're flat out required to participate in events or get sponsorships, etc. But the most needy of the code of conduct are the least likely to read it. In my experience, the people who have caused the most damage at events are off the street, or venue staff, or people who by nature won't be reading that code of conduct that is perhaps on the website. I think in practicality, you should have everyone agree to it on a tablet at the door before they enter the building, or else it's not very useful in practice at that given event. You can cite it if there's an issue, but in all practicality, more so than its existence, in my experience, is the response that matters most. If you have, say, one of you flipping chairs here, we can cite the code of conduct and hope for the best, or you promptly explain that that's not acceptable and someone might get hurt, and we understand maybe you're upset, but look, you really can't do that here, and, well, worse, we call the cops. But responses are very important. I think they should be swift, sincere, consistent, and listen. Humans are really complex. They do things for the darndest reasons, and a lot of people who come off as complete jerks, one might not realize it, especially in free software circles where I think a certain level of Asperger's syndrome is required to participate. A certain level of this curse we all have, or blessing, whatever you want to call it, is required. And people can get into, are they better at filtering what they hear versus what they say, etc., etc. But actually, I've had the worst first impressions with some of my best colleagues in the community. Just, if I had written them off then, I would have lost out long term, and we wouldn't have a great relationship that's lasted years. So be sensitive to that. It helps being a parent. I won't advocate necessarily being a parent as a solution, but there's a certain just responsiveness to chaos that's needed. So, as for responses, vigilantism will backfire. There was a dongle gate thing several years ago, and gee, everybody lost. They didn't quite follow some reasonable response procedures, and some people got socially lynched, and it was not good for anyone involved, including the event. And the event organizers weren't there at someone's side to help them decide what the proper way to handle a concern is. And the people with the concern did not approach the organizers to say, well, I have a concern, let's discuss what are the proper procedures, etc. So that's just a word of advice on vigilantism. And organizations make mistakes. They make screw-ups. They inadvertently drop the ball on things. They might upset somebody. And be prepared to defend your organization and explain what happened, and do it swiftly. And if I'm to cite an example, I'm a little concerned that Eric Raymond spouted off on some really weird stuff, and the OSI has said nothing about it. He was a key founder, and wow, a founding father, if you will, of free software. And to ignore this stuff really doesn't work. And fast forwarding to this week, there's the UC Davis question of trying to erase a certain pepper spray event from the internet. And it'll bite you in the behind, as they're discovering. So just be swift, be responsive, be honest. And, I wanted to add this. There was a very simple tweet from Subway of Jared is no longer associated with the Subway Corporation and its stores. Jared, their spokesperson, got in trouble. And their response was very simple and very direct, and often that's all it takes. Everyone's smart enough to say, wow, he did screw up, and we totally understand that you have cut ties, and it's not your fault that, without knowing the future, that these things happen. So, some tips. Keep it simple in every regard you can. I sure like Plug in that it is a whole whopping domain name. At some point we should think about if it gets handed to another organizer or a community foundation of some form like Software Freedom Conservancy that could hold something in trust, even if that trust is small, even if it's not a massive code base or trademark or all those things. It is an important asset, but it's a tiny, manageable one. Anticipate burnout. People get burned out, and you have to watch it in yourself. You have to watch it in your volunteers. And some people will not be upfront about the fact that they're burning out, and they might crash and burn, and that will not help your organization in the long term. And the more you can do to just recognize it, appreciate it, thank them, give them a break if needed, do it. I don't know of a magic bullet for choosing successors, for identifying successors. There are amazing people at this conference, and some of them will be leading projects and organizations years from now. Help them, inspire them, You haven't met them yet, but they're there, and they always will, and you'll be blown away by the people who just come out of the woodwork. And like, I've had people at Plug, I've never given a talk, but I'd love to give a talk on OpenBSD. I'm like, great, okay. And for those tips, speaking skills are really useful. I was in a little tiny shell and could never ever do this in a million years, but somehow I'm doing this almost weekly right now, and just, it's a skill. Just experiment with it. Anyone giving talks here? Show of hands? Only like 20%? Get out there. Give those talks. It's good for the brain. Some organizations want papers, and it's good to write a paper. Some folks haven't written papers since college. Write a paper. It won't kill you. And from a Plug meeting on giving talks, meta, one attendee's mother had a Fulbright scholarship to, I think, Princeton, like 2 years at Princeton. It's like, wow, that's amazing. I wish I had that. So, but professionally, the best thing she ever did was Toastmasters, which is, they're around the world, I guess, at least around the country, groups where you come together and learn to just stand up and communicate. Because if you want something, it's really handy to communicate that you want it and build a case for it, because you'll be surprised people might be thinking the same thing. They might say, that's pretty reasonable, and you've argued your point, and yes, we will approve your trip to this conference. We'll approve whatever. So get out there and talk. At Plug, I've been pretty aggressive on saying, please speak. We have a Plug speaker in the room today, at least one. Yeah, how's your talk coming back there? Okay. Any day now. Okay, so some potential speakers. Active Directory, come on. So do it. It won't kill you. It didn't kill me last week. Hopefully it won't kill me today. And I may fill in for someone tomorrow. It's a skill. It's like changing a diaper, stripping a rifle, filing a tax report, whatever. It's just a skill. So please, please, please consider that. And this too shall pass. So even if things look brutal, awful, and depressing, it'll pass. When people pass away, that sucks. But maybe someone will fill in that will do honor to them every day moving forward. Again, respond swiftly to just about everything. Even, we've all had our slow responses to things, but leaders should respond pretty quickly. And a lot is projected on an organization. And from a roundtable last week on this very subject, one local group on just business, small business, open source, they moved the meetings to a bigger venue. And it was really impressive. And everyone starts assuming there's this board of directors and budget and stuff. No, it's still, we just kind of meet there and walk in the room, walk out of the room 2 hours later. So it's amazing what people project on leaders, on organizations, you name it. And thank people. Thank your leaders. A lot of it's thankless work. Thank your volunteers. Thank your people for attending. A little bit goes a long way. And there's sort of that implied thanks in open source where if no one said anything about your patch or otherwise, that's a glowing wallop of approval. Well, occasionally thank them. Trust me, it's cool. How are we on time? About 15. If you like, I would love to hear, your experiences on any of these topics. I would love to field your questions. Yes, sir.
Have you started any projects from absolute scratch? And how do you, if you have an idea about a certain project, I'd like to get a bunch of people in, let's say, Latvians, Germans from Russia, or this or that, or something like that. What are key things that you think of to start such a thing?
So the question is, how do you bootstrap a local community, a project, or otherwise? Wow. So the whole stealth startup or build it and they will come thing can be really limited. So it doesn't help to surprise people with it. Hey, I've been working on this secretly, the website's up and all this stuff, and boom, here it is. And everyone's like, oh, okay. It conflicts with our night, various other things. So don't think that you have to keep something secret. Get it out in advance. Get people involved, participating as early as possible, rather than surprising them with it, in my experience, just my observation. Maybe there is a need for that. And I'd love to hear about year 2000 organizations, like local groups that met together to talk about all the software implications of the year 2000 bug. They had a very clear time frame. They had a really good motivation at the time. And I trust most of them have sunsetted. Maybe they're thinking like the Unix bug of 2063 or whenever the heck the Unix epoch time runs out. But I saw a hand go up. Other advice there?
I was going to say, I saw a meetup for web developers. Go from a really small meeting, just people getting together at a cafe. It was like a group of 2 people working on a website and just said, hey, if you're also working on a website, come join us. And it's steadily grown from those 2 people to about 10 regularly and still growing. Meetup.com is just a great way to get started with the effort.
Okay, meetup.com is your friend. His example was 2 web developers in a cafe that just brought more and more in. Portland is very, very lucky to have the Calligator, calligator.org, which is a tech community calendar that's a bit wiki formatted that anyone can just put something up and edit it. And that's been one of the greatest things for Plug. People can find out about a meeting the night before, maybe the morning of the meeting, and they'll show up and they'll come out of the woodwork. And it looks like I've had it posted for a month, even though it's maybe been there for a few hours. So just that awareness from things like Meetup is great, because in the good old days, organizations had mailing lists with like stamps and stuff. And you do get some momentum of people showing up on that same first Thursday or you name it. But bootstrapping is tricky, and my top advice is just get the word out early. Find potential volunteers, potential co-organizers. Like, what if you're at a talk and you meet Saturdays, and who's going to organize your meeting this morning somewhere else? Well, hope that helps. Other experiences? Yes?
I wanted to ask about, you talked about tolerating the jerks in the room and how it can sort of disenfranchise those that can't tolerate the jerks. So when the jerk or jerks are essential contributors and you really need them to be part of the community, what are some of the things that you do when they kind of let that jerk flag fly in the room, and then what are some of the things you do with them one-on-one afterward?
Whoa, the question is what to do with the mission-critical jerks. So I'll say from, what's that?
I said jerks, a change in momentum.
It's a change in momentum? So speaking from a mildly, I'll just say corporate perspective, contain them if you can. Back to that whole Asperger syndrome that's kind of required on some level to participate in this community. Contain them if you can, such that they work closely with the people who understand their value and do that key coding or otherwise. Don't expose them to the client. Don't expose them to the broader community. Be very cautious on, say, having them keynote your event. I've seen very prominent people be thrown out of venues and organizations. And step one is someone who understands them, understands that, wow, maybe they're really a nice person, just they can't filter what's coming out of their mouth. So some people will change. Some won't, in my experience. Yes?
Well, it's kind of like what Linus said at the last DevCon. He, for the most part, surrounds himself with people that tolerate him. And they are the people that are usually talking to people outside of him.
Right.
He doesn't like to talk to people directly because people don't like being insulted as a constructive criticism.
That's a great TED Talk.
I heard that was recent, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interview sort of style with him, and it was really good.
the Torvalds example of him surrounding himself with people who do understand and tolerate that and letting them interface with the community or businesses or you name it who have to further communicate. And there's a recent TED Talk on, I guess, Torvalds talking. Yes?
I've not done stuff with people who are assholes, like I sometimes am one, but identifying like what is this person's strength. So if you're in a leadership position, you can identify what is it that you're doing really well with that super obnoxious, unhelpful behavior, and then giving them a discrete task. So since you're so good at advocating for your particular viewpoint, you can help me in this, then listen for other people's viewpoints and give them space to speak. So giving people things to do, recognizing stuff that they're good at, because everyone has strengths. Some of our strengths are really annoying, or counterproductive. So framing it positively. And then the other thing I was thinking when we were talking about jerks is that sometimes you're just in the wrong place. Sometimes there's a whole room full of jerks just like me. And if I go be productive there, then I've sort of found my niche. And so sometimes behavior that's not helpful in community or in a group is really just a matter of fit. Like someone's a poor fit. And so few people I think are so like indispensable that you can't find another person who doesn't disrupt the culture so much who can do the exact same thing.
So the example is give jerks a task, find out what they're good at. That's part of what I meant by isolating them, just contain them and limit their exposure to the public. Yes?
That's about your content. If you're speaking or you have like an agenda, how do you tailor that to your group in terms of like level of understanding? Is it more advanced, more beginner?
For, say, a user group?
Yeah.
I've had to do that. I've given a talk entitled FreeBSD Virtualization Options. And the talk at scale is very, very different from the talk at BSDCan. One is to core developers who would laugh me off the stage if I was to just dumb it down and sort of preach the converted and tell them what they know. But understanding your audience is very important. I face that with my theme for this year is stop preaching to the converted. Get out and talk to professional tech organizations and bring free software to them. Don't hope that they'll find it if you're lucky. So one critical point there is talk to the organizers about when a sales pitch is appropriate or when raw technical facts are appropriate, speeds and feeds and stats and kernel stuff, or when just a factual overview is appropriate, because you want to get invited back. That's how you get better at it. That's how you grow it. So there's some tips there.
Do you think about finding content to grow your community intentionally? Like, are you looking to grow those new people who haven't heard about stuff and create presentations that would attract them, or do you seek to bring in more advanced users to your group?
So about welcoming content versus preserving content. What's for beginners? What's for just making them more advanced users more advanced, and mix it up. And anyone who's been at this for a while stinks at seeing the obvious. I mean, down at the booth for BSD, people stop by saying, "Hey, your marketing stinks. Your technology is amazing, but if you get involved with a project at a technical level, you start failing to realize that a real simple brochure with 5 good points is a really useful tool. And there are some amazing people who will print those brochures. Community members are amazing. It's amazing what they'll do. And if you're that, off tangent, if you're that person who brings cookies and beer and muffins to an event, you're the hero. It's like, screw the file system stuff. Whatever. It's the beer and the yummy stuff that fuels all that. So there is, fortunately the community is getting so broad that there's a place for every kind of role like that. The Linux brewed beer at LinuxFest and other stuff. It's like, great. So yeah, shake it up on content for beginners, for advanced. Have the advanced people give beginner talks, have the beginners give as advanced a talk as they can give. Because you'll find that the audience will help you out. I had dumb problems connecting the projector, but people will help you out. They'll fill in. They'll come up with experiences that just, wow, you've never thought of. Joy's law is that this Bill Joy, Sun Microsystems, Berkeley, CSRG, the smartest people work for somebody else. You're outnumbered by smart people outside your organization, and all these great ideas come from there. So just listen, try to recognize them. Yeah, I can go on. Yes, sir.
Have you had experience with communities in decline?
Communities in decline. Well, the user group in Latvia was forever declining as they sat there trying to determine who would file some paperwork rather than talking program stuff. So this weekend, in addition to the Sunday school, the person who's organized the rummage sale forever is in the hospital. And people are freaking out. And the long-term organizers are freaking out that the person who has always done it, who's in their probably 70s or 80s, is not able to do it. And all these young professional parents of the Sunday school parents, who got oral surgeons and such, are standing by ready to help. And it's been most eye-opening to first get people to recognize that there's like people who are here to help. They're right under your nose. They're literally under your church. And just for once, there was a visit from the Sunday school to the church. There's like 10 old people on one side and like 17 kids on the other. It's like, you have to really pound the obvious into people's heads, sadly. So, some organizations have, like the Y2K Bellingham Professional Consultants Association had if it hypothetically existed, had a really clear mandate and a really clear window of opportunity and should be sunsetted the moment we realize, whoa, we survived Y2K and we learned some lessons and catch you at the PHP meeting or whatever. So try to identify exactly what's going on, what's going wrong. You know, a person disappearing or moving to a different city can be pretty obvious, but maybe it is that a jerk is discouraging people from attending, and you don't realize how many people you've scared off with this one person, and you remove them from it, explain to others, like, yeah, he's back on his meds. Come on back, we're still here. So, have you been involved in a declining community?
Slowly, but it's kind of a niche community too, so the available pool is growing.
Is there an example you can give?
We just keep at it, refocus, reorganize, like you talk about the paperwork kind of thing. We pull the business part of it away from the fun part of it.
Okay, can I ask the niche?
It's a Toyota 4x4 club.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, Toyota 4x4 club. So, car hacker culture has changed a lot. That's just, sorry, it's now like BIOS updates rather than like tuning the carburetor. So you've got some challenges there. Check out the Top Gear on trying to destroy the Toyota truck. That was brilliant. But think about if that should diversify, because you mentioned the few web developers who meet in a cafe. Well, I have some concern about broad organizations like, Boil the Ocean, Linux Foundation, or LinuxFest. It's like, well, okay, that's really broad as opposed to a file system developer conference or something. So experiment with both, visit both events, find out what's appropriate, because there are probably speakers at each one that's appropriate for the other.
Yeah, actually, so we have a regular Drupal meetup, and then this meeting was more of it was like a small, it was a weekly thing rather than a monthly workshop.
Okay.
And lately we've been thinking about creating content for either group that is appropriate to connect them, keep more of an ongoing thing throughout the month in between the bigger meetings. So you could do something like, make something that's really low level, like a meetup where people come ride around with you guys or something, or versus working on the cars or whatever.
I mean, we're all good, kind of, but I'm just curious of other kinds of approaches and things, just in general. That's what I'm thinking.
Cbug also, as an example, because I'm still on their mailing list for.
Where's Cbug?
Seattle
Okay.
USB Users Group.
Okay.
They declined enough that not enough people show up to the monthly, so they're looking at actually moving to just doing quarterly.
Do
to see if
they
that
exist? Because last time I looked for the Seattle USB group, the response was we don't exist anymore.
They started back up 6 months to a year ago.
Okay.
And they're meeting in their old place that they always met at.
Well, I don't know that.
It's on their site if you actually find their
I'll
site.
look for it.
But yeah, they're talking about maybe meeting quarterly if membership roles don't pick up, because it might not fit into people's time frame for a monthly meeting.
So
Yeah, Slack.
for the recording, maybe Cbug is active, maybe it's not. We'll find out.
It's magic. Sometimes it is. Sometimes
Maybe you're now all grown up and you meet at BSDCan. And it's like, well, that's where you do it intensely for a week rather than like, every month, and you see each other on IRC, Slack, whatever, you name it, podcasts, whatever. Other questions, experiences?
Comment a little bit about burnout and motivation. It's a challenge. I mean, I've signed up to do all these things like organize an unconference or be one of the leaders of this user group. You have in your head this vision of what you need to do, but after a long day of work, it's so hard to actually do that, to reach out to people, to speakers, to plan agendas and all that stuff.
Okay, so facing burnout. I'll throw one point to that, which is, ideally, if you're a professional and you do the thing, be it printing, be it websites, be it whatever, please treat your volunteer stuff exactly like the professional stuff. And yes, you're dedicating that time, and you might even get a tax-deductible donation for that. But don't think that, wow, I'll do this delayed crap for the group and money all day, because it's better for the community if you just do it, give it your all, briefly, rather than just sort of hand-wavy dabble in it. You had a question?
Vancouver Linux User Group, we're a declining group. The last person that was doing our monthly talks burned out and can't do it. It's fallen in my lap, and I kind of faced the same issue. But yeah, kind of just putting the grind at it and trying to get more speakers in, and I'm sure eventually I'll be burned out, but we'll be back at that square pretty soon.
So that said, Vancouver Linux User Group is declining some, having challenges there. With Plug, you break it, you bought it. If I'm missing a speaker, I'm speaking, and that's cool. You get really quick at coming up with the topic and just unleashing. You may recall the Troy McClure in Simpsons where he's sleeping on a couch and they poke him. He's like, and then the family was moved to Springfield. It's like, okay, great. So you just have to be ready with that. It's a skill. Might give a talk tomorrow. It's like, okay, why not? Roll with it. Yes, sir.
When do you quit, and when do you join?
When do you quit and when do you join? So about the quitting thing, the whole purpose factor. If we're doing the local community school for my grandfather, he's dead. He won't be here to thank any of us, but just you do it until you're dead. And that's on one level. As for the hands-on organizing, life will probably decide for you when you quit, when you stop. When you start, well,
like, let's say we have two organizations that maybe both are in decline, but they have similar, maybe slightly different flavors of a certain thing, but they have some relations. So
consider merging. You know your community best.
But
oh, thank you. Okay. Yeah, I don't think there's a magic bullet answer there, but you know your community best. Talk to other groups. I touched on earlier, there's Toastmasters as an organization. There's also various community foundations that put on like nonprofit board training. And they have, say, down at Oregon State, I believe, every January, board training. And even if you just have the most distant relationship to that, you'll find it pretty interesting, just all these different sessions on working with volunteers, all the bookkeeping stuff, all the tax stuff. And it's a question of broad community leadership, but it comes in various forms. And talk to other communities. If your group your city has a really successful FOO user group, Drupal, whatever, talk to them, see what's working. Community leaders tend to talk behind the scenes and help each other out and send each other to conferences and other stuff, because that's what keeps it flowing, keeps the momentum. And one point in all of this is that you're trying to build momentum. That's where sustainability comes from. Some of it's autopilot, some of it's hard-earned, some of it's just, you name it. Anyway, hope that helps. Final points, questions, or otherwise? I will be here this next 2 days. I'll be off and down at the sort of mixed FreeBSD Foundation and FreeNAS booth. I'm happy to talk to you about all these things. I'm here in the Northwest, so Seagull is coming up. That's in November, I believe the 11th and 12th, perhaps. And that's an up-and-coming event where it's that, okay, it seems a bit awkward that Seattle itself doesn't have a prominent conference. It's a big city with a lot of tech people. So LinuxFest Northwest is amazing, but it's different. Each event has its own identity, and don't copy some other event. Do something unique. Unconferences have been fantastic. I work on a hypervisor that is directly out of an unconference. We all got in a group, one big group, which you're not supposed to. You're supposed to break up, and we decided, no, we actually need a hypervisor. And then there was a second day meeting of like corporate people who thought, who could do it, who could, blah, 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 blah. And one thing led to another, and it's been central to my volunteering on a technical level. Are there any healthy remaining unconferences in the Northwest?
InfoCamp.
Yes. What's that? InfoCamp. Tell us about InfoCamp.
So we're for information science people like working in either communications or like libraries or even in tech. It's about 50-50. And it happens at UW. It's been
UW InfoCamp. Cool.
Yeah, been about 10 years running now.
Okay. Easy to find?
Yeah, just check it out at InfoCamp.
Okay.
Seattle.infocamp.org.
Okay, great. InfoCamp.
Happens in October. See you there.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you.